if we look at these numbers, and again, I'm not asking you to remember numbers, but if you have 3 or more of these factors, you are said to have metabolic syndrome, which puts you at risk for not only heart disease, but also type 2 diabetes. Generally, the individual factors are treated. There's no one treatment that will address all of these factors. You have to address them individually. And even if you only had 1 or 2 of these, you may not be diagnosed with metabolic syndrome, but you probably want to take action to help improve those numbers. As I said earlier, when we looked at that graph that showed high cholesterol being associated with heart attack, well, up to 50% of heart attack patients have normal LDL and normal cholesterol levels. So in 2013, guidelines were revised in terms of how to treat cholesterol levels in what was called the Omnibus Risk Calculator, and I will post this calculator. Let's talk about oxidation of fat. If you recall the structure of saturated and unsaturated fats, and we'll review that in a second, the double bonds of those unsaturated fats are unstable, so they're targets for what are called oxidation or damage by oxygen. As I said, these are unstable portions of the fatty acid. That double bond can break, and it can break the unsaturated fatty acid into fragments, and these fragments can be sticky. Sticky fragments are also a factor that can injure the artery wall, leading to inflammation. On the left, we're looking at a double bond, and then on the right, what's happened is that double bond has been broken, and now we have fragments of that unsaturated fatty acid, which again are sticky, can stick to the blood vessel wall and lead to injury. These fragments contribute to the formation of atherosclerotic plaque. I'm sure you've heard of antioxidants. They're very popular in terms of being offered and sold as supplements. What I want to tell you, I have here the food versus supplement dilemma. Well, of course, this is a nutrition class, so of course I'm going with food. But let me just talk a little bit about antioxidants. Antioxidants prevent oxidation. If oxidants or reactive oxygen species cause oxidation, antioxidants prevent that reaction or reduce that reaction, thus reducing risk for heart disease. We have nutrients that are considered antioxidants, including vitamin E, vitamin C, and beta-carotene, the vegetable form of vitamin A. There are certain minerals with antioxidant cofactor functions, and these include zinc, copper, and iron. To me, there is no dilemma. You should eat and get your nutrients from food, because when you, for example, eat a carrot, you don't not only get beta-carotene, but you get calories, you get fluid, you get fiber, you get other nutrients that help your body absorb the beta-carotene more efficiently, improving the bioavailability of the nutrients. Whereas if you take a beta-carotene supplement, that's all you're getting is beta-carotene. Eat the food. We briefly talked about hydrogenation of fat at the beginning of the semester. I want to go into a little more detail now. Trans fatty acids are found in processed foods that contain partially hydrogenated oils. In January of 2020, a regulation was supposed to go into effect that was eliminating hydrogenated oils from the food supply. I'm curious to see how that works out, and hopefully next year at this time I won't have to be talking about foods that have been hydrogenated. But we're going to talk about it today. The double bonds found in polyunsaturated fatty acids and monounsaturated fatty acids are removed during this process of hydrogenation, adding hydrogen. And what happens when you add hydrogen to an unsaturated fat is that it becomes more saturated. Hydrogenation was originally thought to be quite a boon for the food industry because, for example, when margarine was made, they took a liquid vegetable oil, bombarded it with hydrogen, and made it more like a solid animal fat. It looked more like butter, it tasted more like butter, and it didn't contain any cholesterol. Back then, we thought cholesterol in food affected cholesterol in your blood, and that eating trans fat or hydrogenated fats were better for you. Now we know not so much. There still are hydrogenated fats found in food, but the softer, for example, the softer the margarine, the less the trans fatty acids found in the product. Stick margarines and shortenings that are more solid at room temperature tend to be more hydrogenated and contain more partially hydrogenated fatty acids. This is to show you what's going on during the process of hydrogenation of fat. You have the double bonds of the polyunsaturated fatty acids. You bombard those fatty acids with hydrogens, and you get rid of the double bonds by adding the hydrogen. If you look on the left in the spotlight, you'll see that the hydrogens are on the same side of the double bond. This will be significant in a minute. So partial hydrogenation was a boon for the industry. It improved shelf life by making these fats more solid at room temperature. They lasted longer on the shelf. It improved the taste because it had more of a taste of butter. But what it did was get rid of those double bonds. And what happened was, during this process of hydrogenation or partial hydrogenation, the fatty acid was modified from saturated to what's called trans fatty acid, from a saturated fatty acid to a trans fatty acid. And we now know that while cholesterol in food doesn't affect cholesterol in the blood, trans fatty acids do affect heart disease risk. On the top, we have two carbons connected by a double bond. The one on the left, the hydrogens are on the same side of the double bond, and this is referred to as the cis configuration, when they're on the same side of the double bond. On the right, during the hydrogenation process, not all double bonds are removed, but what happens is some of them move from one side of the double bond to the other side. This is what is referred to as partial hydrogenation. If an unsaturated fat loses all its double bonds during the hydrogenated process, it becomes a saturated fat. But if any double bonds remain, then that fatty acid is partially hydrogenated, and it changes the chemistry of the fatty acid so that the hydrogens are on opposite sides of the double bond, and that's what trans fatty acid means, that the hydrogens are on opposite sides of the double bond. If you look at this statement across the bottom of the slide, about 80% of our trans fatty acid intake comes from processed food and about 20% from animal products. As I said earlier, I'm hoping in a few years I won't have to use these slides because we won't be getting any trans fatty acids from processed food. But we do get them from animal products. The concern is the additional fat that you may get, or the additional trans fatty acids you may get from eating highly processed, hydrogenated food. This is also showing you the structure. The trans fatty acids on top, if you look in the middle at the double bond, you see that the hydrogens are on opposite side. And on the bottom, when you have cis fatty acids, the hydrogens are on the same side of the double bond. It changes the structure, which changes the function, and the trans fatty acids are increasing risk for heart disease. Most dietary trans fats come from partial hydrogenation. And as I said, this is the process in which some of the carbon-to-carbon double bonds in polyunsaturated fats are converted to single bonds. Trans fatty acids, that's the TFA, hopefully y'all got that by now, contribute to heart disease by increasing LDLs, decreasing HDLs, and increasing triglycerides. And they can also contribute to inflammation, which then goes on to affect the arterial wall and can increase risk for type 2 diabetes by increasing resistance to insulin. As consumers, what you can do to help reduce your risk or avoid, I'd say avoid here, look at the nutrition facts panel. Now, a food can call itself trans fatty acid free if it has less than or equal to 0.5 grams of trans fatty acids per serving. So this is where you need to look at the ingredient list. If you see the words partially hydrogenated fat, There are some trans fatty acids in the food product, so it's important to watch how much of that food you're eating. You want to try to limit your foods with those partially hydrogenated oils on the list. You want to bake with vegetable oils that are unsaturated. Try to use margarines that are soft, and they now have margarines that are trans fatty acid free. Limit deep fat fried foods like French fries, corn chips, donuts, and chicken nuggets. And try to reduce your intake of high saturated fat, meat, and dairy products, because that's where the natural trans fatty acids come from. They're formed by those bacteria in the microbiome of the animals. Those are the bacteria that will act on the unsaturated fatty acids and create these trans